everyone, and welcome to the Port of Los Angeles August Media Briefing. I'm Chelsea Boyd with the Port's Communications team, and joining us, as always, is our Executive Director, Jean Seroka. Good morning, Jean.
Hello, Chelsea. Great to have you back. And thanks to all the journalists participating today. We're going to cover a lot of ground, from our exceptional July numbers to the recent flurry of tariff announcements and their impact on trade. Following that, we'll be joined by Dr. Zach Rogers, Associate Professor of Supply Chain Management at Colorado State University. Zach is the lead author of the monthly Logistics Managers Index, which tracks the transportation, warehousing, and inventory sectors. I'm looking forward to this data-driven insights on where the supply chain is headed in the months to come. And then, of course, we'll have ample time for both of us to address your questions.
That all sounds great, Jean. You mentioned those exceptional July numbers. Can you please share where we landed and what's driving that spike?
Chelsea, the Port of Los Angeles has just recorded our all-time record cargo movement in a single month. This past July, our dedicated longshore workers and terminal operators handled 1,020,000 container units. That surpasses our May 2021 pandemic high mark by 8,000 container units. No other port in the Western Hemisphere has moved over 1 million containers in a single month. Now, we've done it twice. A big shout out to the entire waterfront workforce and stakeholders for this tremendous accomplishment. All of this was done without any vessel backups or on-dock congestion, thanks to the incredible efforts of everyone involved. This achievement is reflected in the data, as July volume outpaced last year by 8.5% and came in 18% ahead of our all-important 5-year average for the month. 3 stats really tell the story. We had 107 vessel calls in July, 30% more than average over the past 5 years. 16 of those ships had a capacity over 13,000 TEUs, setting another all-time mark. We saw 11 unscheduled ship arrivals, known as extra loaders, the most since the pandemic. Not surprisingly, much of this volume was fueled by importers hustling to bring in cargo ahead of potential tariff hikes later this month and beyond. In fact, our July imports soared to 544,000 TEUs, setting yet another benchmark at the Port of Los Angeles. That outpaces last year by 8% and is 19% higher than our July 5-year average. Shifting over to exports, the port handled 122,000 TEUs, a 6% year-over-year increase. While that makes just 2 months of incremental upticks, there's concern among ag sector and other exporters about the impact of trade policy on American goods headed overseas. While empty containers landed at 355,000 TEUs, that's a 10% jump over last year and the highest in 4 years. With so much available slot space due to heavy imports, shipping lines took advantage of this opportunity to bring more empties back to Asia. After an unprecedented July, the Port of Los Angeles has now handled 6 million TEUs heading into August, putting us 5% ahead of last year's pace. Which leads me to the next question on everyone's mind. What's next? Looking at key data from the Port Optimizer and talking to many importers, it seems likely that goods coming into the U.S. may have just peaked. A lot of inventory is already here. We'll delve deeper into this with our guests, but from where I sit, I don't expect a flood of cargo despite all the trade announcements coming out of Washington. Whatever the outcome, the Port of Los Angeles stands ready to quickly and efficiently move our nation's imports and exports for U.S. businesses.
Thank you, Jean. That's a great overview. I know you and Zach are going to dive deeper into these tariffs, but do you want to share any initial thoughts on the recent trade policy news?
Yes, Chelsea, there are new tariffs now on more than 90 countries. They went into effect last Thursday, pushing the effective U.S. tariff rates to the highest point in nearly a century. China tariff rate that was extended just Monday of this week for another 90 days has an effective tariff rate of 55%. Trade framework deals announced recently with the European Union, Japan, both at 15% tariffs. Some believe that could have been a lot worse. South Korea came in at 15%, while Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines negotiated a 19% tariff. Vietnam and Taiwan sat in at 20%. These framework deals represent taxes on imports to the United States for American goods manufactured overseas. And beyond the framework deals with those letters that were announced, both India and Brazil now sit at 50% tariffs. All this means higher prices, fewer selections, and probably lower inventories as we look to the back half of this year. Already, the Ford Motor Company, Procter & Gamble, Walmart, Nike, Mattel, and many others have announced price hikes. And while yesterday's announcement on inflation and core CPI came in at a relatively moderate level, 2.7% for CPI, many experts anticipate that number ticking up the balance of this year as businesses will be forced to not only negotiate with their overseas manufacturers and try to find efficiencies internally, they're going to pass on to their customers and consumers. These shifting deadlines, announcements, and more discussion about trade policy is a lot to digest for American companies and their trading partners overseas. Many I speak with continue to run through their simulation models, trying to mitigate the cost hikes that they're witnessing and find surety in their supply chains. It's been a roller coaster all year long. The ride's not over yet.
Thanks, Gene, for those thoughts, and thank you for perfectly setting the stage for today's guest. Would you please introduce him?
My pleasure, Chelsea. Before Dr. Zach Rogers started teaching supply chain management and before he earned his PhD from Arizona State, he worked as a warehouse manager at a 500,000 square foot facility in Nevada. Today, he shapes the generation of business professionals, sharing his extensive industry experience right in the classroom. In addition to his previously mentioned role as a lead author in the Logistics Managers Index, Zach is known for his research on supply chain efficiency and has contributed to numerous publications. And it's a family business of sorts for the Rogers family. His dad, Dale, is a distinguished professor of business at the Carey School and its supply chain management program at Arizona State in Tempe. Zach, thanks for joining us today from Fort Collins, Colorado. I'm sure your students appreciate learning from someone with hands-on logistics experience.
Well, thank you for having me. I don't know how much they always appreciate it, actually. At least not when they graduate. I think they get it more. But at 8 a.m., 19-year-olds aren't necessarily thinking, man, this is great. I'm so glad this guy worked in a warehouse.
Well put. And we were both one of those 19-year-olds at a time trying to find our way in business. So let's jump right in, Zach. The Logistics Managers Index and the trends you're seeing right now from the latest report, which came out just week, try to explain it to us. What are you seeing from your lens?
Sure. So first off, the Logistics Managers Index is something we've been doing for 9 years. It's a change index, and the numbers function very similarly to the PMI. And they actually helped us with our methodology. And so essentially, we go out and we talk to a whole lot of folks. Any number above 50 means expansion. The further above 50, the faster rate of expansion. Below 50 is contraction. Further below 50, the faster the rate of contraction. And we ask our respondents about inventories, warehousing, and transportation. And this month, the overall index came in at 59.2, which is a fairly robust rate of growth. It's a little bit under actually the all-time growth rate of 61.5, but 59.2 is still relatively high. The reason that we care about that about the way things are moving is because we believe, and this has sort of been shown in the data and the analysis we've done over the last 9 years, that logistics is really a leading indicator, much like the Port of Los Angeles throughput numbers, is really a leading indicator for economic activity. You know, if something's going to be sold in September, it was probably on a truck in August or sitting in a warehouse somewhere. So that's why we check these things. We came in at 59.2, as I said, this month. And that's really driven by movements in inventories, specifically the costs around inventories. Inventory costs overall came in at 71.9, which means that inventories are very expensive right now. And that's for two reasons. And Gene, I think, sort of thought about both of them in his remarks. One is the tariffs. We are seeing cost increases, especially for products like apparel or toys that are sort of lower margin goods that can't do as much absorption of the tariffs. And the other is that so much inventory is already here, and it's really put stress on the warehousing network. And so there's a lot of cost right now that is associated with holding on to goods. And that's especially true if we look upstream. You know, we always split out our upstream and downstream respondents. And essentially what I mean by that is we look at retailers as being our sort of downstream folks, and then everybody else up the line, wholesalers, manufacturers, distributors. If we look at where the real activity in supply chains is right now, it's upstream. We brought a lot of inventory forward in January, February, and March. I mean, it sort of looked, January and February and March, the movement sort of looked like they do normally in like August, September, and October. The difference being, the holiday season doesn't start in the middle of March like it does with October. And so we've had a lot of goods sort of built up. Because of that, and because of trying to keep costs under control, we've really seen retailers try to run inventories down. So, if we split the numbers apart, right now, our retailers are coming in at 47.6 for inventory levels. That means they're actually reducing inventories. Now, things are still high because of how much they built up earlier, but they're reducing inventories. Where we see the activity is with their upstream partners. Again, these like wholesalers and folks like that, their numbers came in at 58.5 this month. And related to that, their inventory costs are at 71. Their warehousing capacity is at 48. And this gets back to what was alluded to earlier. There's so much inventory in the system right now. And most of it is sitting in kind of the middle mile. If you put yourselves in the mind of a supply chain, all right, well, we got to get all these things in before the tariffs really hit. And we saw that with the big June and big July at the Port of LA and all over the country. So we bring all of this stuff in, but we don't necessarily want it on our books as the retailer. Walmart is not thinking, hey, it'd be a good idea. I want to hold on to 3 months of inventory. They don't really operate like that. And so what happens then is it's the middle of the supply chain that gets squeezed. And those also tend to be disproportionately smaller companies. And so right now, the reason a lot of, sort of consumers haven't seen the really big impact of any inflation is because the costs haven't necessarily moved downstream. They're sort of sitting right now in that middle mile. I would expect that we will see inventories move down in September. Generally, retailers' inventories peak in like the middle of October. And so I do expect we will eventually see those inventories move down. But for right now, essentially what this is telling us is peak season is happening in sort of a bifurcated way. So we have all that activity at the Port of Los Angeles, and that's reflected in our upstream numbers. So we have a lot of activity upstream in the supply chain. We haven't seen as much downstream yet. And what that's done, partly also, is depressed freight prices a bit domestically because we don't have a sort of demand exceeding supply. We have had enough supply to sort of take care of the upstream spike, and now we're moving to the downstream spike. And I think it lines up a lot with what Gene said earlier. Because of that, because so much of this activity has been up here, and our numbers would also say we probably don't need a lot more inventory ahead of the holiday season because we have so much already. Because that spike's mostly been in the sort of top and middle of the supply chain, we haven't seen the big price increases yet, but early indicators look like we are going to start seeing those more at the consumer level.
Thanks, Zach. Higher inventories, some padding, working down average costs. We haven't seen that necessarily passed on yet to Main Street or My Street, but it's coming.
It is absolutely. And you are already seeing some vestiges of it with back to school. Kids apparel, toys, things like that have seen some significant price increases year over year. Now, things like electronics, we haven't seen the same sort of price increase. And part of that is so much was brought in ahead of time that's giving us a buffer. And then the other piece is there's more wiggle room there. So, when inflation happened in 2022, you never waste a good crisis if you're a company. And so we saw some firms sort of maybe increasing their margin even past what inflation would have said they needed to increase the margins, right? And so because of that, there's a little more padding for higher end, high margin items. Low margin stuff like apparel, we've already eaten through most of that. And we can't expect the sort of middle mile or overseas suppliers to eat much more cost than they already have. We've sort of pulled all of our levers already. And so now you would expect to see that cost get pushed downstream to consumers.
And we talk about this way ahead of what happens at the consumer level because we've been seeing it for months and months now. And then as we landed here just this past week with all the trade policy announcements that have been coming out at a fast clip, what do you see next based on those announcements? The impact on international trade, the flows, and what we're going to see maybe towards the fourth quarter of this year?
Sure. Well, one of the things that's been very interesting to me is to see how many importers are gamblers. And as somebody who grew up in Reno, Nevada, I appreciate that. Because the bet that a lot of folks have been making, it does seem, especially in the last quarter, is, well, maybe the tariffs won't be so bad. We keep seeing things get pushed down the road. The tariffs on China, for instance, all right, on April 2nd, here they come. Okay, now July 9th, now August 1st, now August 9th, now it's going to be sometime in November. We just added another 90 days. And partly, so if you're importing in from China, of course, it's 55% more expensive, and that's not great. But it's not 190% or whatever, the sort of embargo-like numbers that have been threatened. And so right now, if you're betting as an importer that the tariffs are going to keep getting pushed down the road, you've been winning all of those bets. And so because of that, it does seem to me as if some of the attitude that we saw in the first half of the year, when it was really just crisis, panic mode, has moderated a bit. And you sort of have to play your cards between, well, do I bet that tariffs are going to go away, or at least kind of be delayed, and I'll just keep bringing things in as normal? Or do I bet that they're going to be big? And if I'm betting they're going to be big, I'm making up that other cost on storage costs and all of these other sort of, because we're holding on to stuff for 4 or 5 months. And so to me, it'll be very interesting to see what happens next. I would expect we have sort of a quieter period at the ports. I mean, we'll still have some flows, but I don't think we'll see the sort of traditional peak season spikes, partly because, as you mentioned, everything is already here for the holiday season. What's going to be very interesting is to see when the sort of revamp happens ahead of things like Chinese New Year, because we don't have enough goods pulled in to just last in perpetuity. We're going to need to bring more stuff in. Now, one of the things that's interesting is, where do you bring them in from? And are you bringing in components versus finished goods? We've seen an uptick in finished goods coming in versus components, partly because right now the tariffs are heaviest on the components. I mean, you bring in a car from Japan, 15%. You bring the components in to build it, well, Canada and Mexico are 25 or 30%. China, batteries 50%. Stuff from Korea is 40%. You're paying U.S. labor. Steel and aluminum are 50%. You have all that sort of math, or just 15% over here on a Japanese car, you're probably just going to go with the Japanese car. And so the other thing we're seeing, in addition to, I think, changes in the flows of where things are coming from, are the types of goods that are coming in. And it seems like, from the folks that we're talking to, there's going to be a little more focus on finished goods than there have been on components.
That matches up really well with what I've been seeing. I was in Detroit recently talking not only to the OEMs who have taken the tariffs on the chin with announcements from GM and Ford over the last week, but the tiered suppliers, their supply chains, their order cycle process is a lot more narrow than it is in the finished goods retail sector. They're able to adapt with lower inventory levels, but a steady stream. Because again, if you shut down an auto plant, that's $2 to $4 million per hour in lost productivity. Now, while these prices are going up, just keeping those parts and components flowing has been job number one for many of the tiered guys.
That's absolutely right. You know, if talking about those 19-year-olds on the very first day of class, they tell them, hey, question on the first day on the very first test will be, your most important job is a constant assurance of supply. It's a fill in the blank. So if anybody on the call is going to come take Management 301 at Colorado State anytime soon, I'm just give you that one for free. And it's absolutely true for all these companies. We have to maintain a constant assurance supply, and what that's meant at the moment is we'll just pay a little more for it. We haven't been able to really reshore significant, volumes of manufacturing as of yet. And there's a couple reasons behind that. One, it takes a lot to bring manufacturing in to set it up. I mean, just look at, we've been trying to build these semiconductor plants in Arizona for the last 3 years. We just don't have the tacit knowledge. There's not enough people who have been building semiconductors that live in Arizona. So we're bringing people in and they're still not up and running. The other part of that is, and it's just like you mentioned, even if you put the final assembly in the United States, you're not going to pull all the components in. It doesn't make sense financially to manufacture these components. And so if our choice is between bring more in, and pay all this for the components, or just sort of wait it out, right now we see a lot of people in the wait it out camp. And there's announcements, yes, we'll in the future we'll invest this and we'll do these things. But at the moment, it's really hard for any company to justify making a big CapEx, say we're going to build this factory in Ohio, if we don't know what the rules are going to be. The real story, I think, this year is not even just the tariffs, because tariffs exist. We've had tariffs on pickup trucks for 60 years, and we can deal with that. The problem is the uncertainty. It's like, if I don't know where I'm going to be living, I'm not going to sign a 2-year lease on an apartment. And so because of that, a lot of these companies are sort of paying month to month, where prices are a lot higher. And there's not much we can do, I think, to really, sort of reshore significant manufacturing until we know what the rules are. Because if the rules keep changing, I mean, look at Apple. They put 15% of their iPhones in India, and everyone thought that was a great idea, and now we have 50% tariffs on India. They're not going to now invest in some third country to move a bunch of production there until they know what the rules are going to be. And so at this moment, uncertainty has sort of paralyzed decision makers in the supply chains, but we're not running out of stuff. We are maintaining a constant assurance of supply. So I do think it speaks to the robustness and the resiliency of, and just how well run so many supply chains are, that even with all the uncertainty, we're not seeing empty shelves.
Good points. On your LinkedIn posts, Zach, we see you refer a lot to our port community system, the Port Optimizer, and its signal module. It's taken from U.S. Customs data and a plethora of feeds from shipping lines and others. How do you guys use that signal data, and what is it telling you right now?
Well, the Port of LA in many ways is the front door of the United States. All the stuff coming into the San Pedro Bay, especially anything from Asia, it's more than likely to come into LA. And so for us, it is the absolute sort of bleeding edge in terms of a leading indicator. So we always look at sort of throughputs, TEUs, and also even beyond TEUs coming in, look at how many containers are sitting. What are the dwell times? I always look at the little pie chart. Okay, what percentage has been there 13 days or more? And so for us, the Port of LA numbers are really helpful because they sort of tell us what might be coming. We see a pretty good correlation with TEUs, import volumes coming into the Port of LA, and our sort of upstream inventory numbers. So generally, if, when we saw the Port of LA numbers really going up starting in December, which you don't normally see big throughputs in December, by the way, starting December and January and February, we kind of knew, all right, we're going to see a big spike in the spring, and that's absolutely what happened. And so we, even as we were writing our December report, we didn't have the upstream numbers for January yet, but we could say, look, TEUs are up, 40% at the Port of LA. And you guys give such a a nice historical perspective on stuff. Up 40% in the Port of LA. We expect this number to come up next month, and then that's sort of exactly what we saw.
Excellent. Shift back to the classroom. It's so great to see students really interested in the supply chain. And for us, lightning strikes twice, right? COVID put a spotlight on this industry, and now these tariffs and trade policies have done just the same. And it wasn't always the case that students were going into supply chain curriculum looking for careers. What's the key message that you're trying to convey to the students that come through your classroom?
Oh, that's absolutely right. They don't make a lot of romantic comedies where the lead is an inventory manager. They're always in marketing or finance. And so, for us, COVID happening really put supply chain sort of on the front page of newspapers, for the first time. And then, of course, tariffs are in the news now. And so a lot of students now, come in knowing what supply chain is. That wasn't the case. I always go talk to the freshman classes and say, hey, what is supply chain? And pre-COVID, I remember getting one kid say, is it chain manufacturing? I said, yeah, we got a whole major, just we're building chains. And so now they come in and they know what it means. And that really is helpful for us. And we'll have people come in and say, hey, my dad owns an auto shop in Greeley and he can't get tires. And he says that's a supply chain problem and I should come learn about supply chain. And so, we love having that kind of kid. And basically what we tell all of our students is supply chains touch every industry. They touch every country. Anywhere that you want to work, there's a supply chain. And in order to maintain that constant assurance of supply, you need to be able to take disparate inputs from all over the world and create outputs that are affordable, that are marketable, that we're not going to run out of. If you're the kind of person who likes to look at gray areas, if you want to just do, debits and credits, that's fine. God bless them. But if you like to work with ambiguity and solve puzzles and problems, that's what supply chain is. And so it attracts, I think, generally sort of a curious student, a student who likes to, basically if students like Legos, they're more likely to be a supply chain major, I think. If you like taking things apart and seeing how they work, and whether you're going to be in negotiations and purchasing, or a warehouse person like me, transportation and logistics like you and the folks working with you, all of that is possible with supply chain. And so it really, I always think, the material sells itself. I just show up and turn the slides on, and the students generally seem to, pretty positive about it.
Humble as always, but I will say, Zach, in more than 6 years of doing these press conferences, I believe that's the first reference to a rom-com movie that we've ever had.
I like to be a trailblazer.
Fantastic. So as we head into turn number 3 as a Hollywood backlot here at the Port of Los Angeles, we're going to turn it back over to Chelsea and see what questions we have now from the media.
Thank you, Gene. We've got several questions that came in early, and we'll get to some questions in the chat box below. So if you'd like to submit a question, you can put it right in that Q&A box. Please remember to include your name and affiliation. That really helps us out. We're going to start with a question that is for both Zach and Gene. Zach, will come to you first. This is from Jeff Berman of Logistics Management. Jeff asks, with the White House tariff announcements with the majority of U.S. trading partners, is there less uncertainty in the supply chain now compared to in the spring?
There's somewhat less because we do have rules in place. But I think the question still is, will those rules hold steady? We don't really know. And we've seen, like, let's take Brazil, for example. We've seen, way increased tariffs on Brazil, 50%, which I hope nobody likes coffee too much, increased 50% on Brazil because of a sort of a political issue around Bolsonaro, their previous president. India thought they had sort of a deal lined up, and now, well, you're buying oil from Russia, it's 50%. And so I do think there is somewhat more certainty than there was, but it remains to be seen if those trade deals are going to be changed again. It's better to have a deal than to not have a deal. But to me, it certainly doesn't seem like, and no one I'm talking to in supply chain is thinking, oh, great, 15% on Japan. I'm sure that will be the rule forever. I will go about my business now.
Yeah, I agree. I agree totally with Zach. And even closer to home, our country's two biggest trading partners are really they're in confinement right now with super high tariffs and no understanding really as to how the USMCA agreement or the individual countries' bilateral trade framework negotiations may pan out. And according to the Dallas Fed, the average part that goes into an automobile before it hits the dealership lot in Southern California goes across that border 7 times before making it out there with a sticker price and an MSRP that we may look at to purchase. There's a lot to be learned, and even with the framework deals that are in place, the 90-day extension on China could mean that I know what my price is coming out of China now for the next 3 months. I'm going to start shopping my products to different manufacturers, different countries, and then the supply chain transportation community is going to have to catch up with those decisions, putting in place services and talent to manage the business. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Gene. Next question is for you. It comes from Lorianne Larocco from CNBC. Lorianne asks, what does the inbound vessel count look like as far as you can see? Are you concerned about further pullback?
Thanks for joining, as always, Lorianne. I think we may have peaked in July with more than 1 million 20-foot equivalent units. August doesn't look that bad, though. Damian Young here at the port has represented to me that he's looking at about 850 to 900,000 TEUs, covering about 90 ships as we know it right now. There could be some movement in the number of ships, but in all, a really solid month, yet less than July and less than what we witnessed last August as that buildup of inventory really started to take shape before that big December number Zach mentioned earlier. So not a loser of a month, but really I think we're going to start to see the product dwindle just simply because of all the inventory that's in the country. Thanks, Lorianne.
We've gotten this question in a couple different forms from a couple different reporters. This is for both Zach and Gene. I'm going to condense here. This is talking about the rail merger between Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern. What could that mean for West Coast ports? Zach, will you take that first?
I think it's great for West Coast ports, actually, because now you have the first continuous link from the West Coast to the East Coast. And, you know, most Americans live on the East Coast. So I think it actually makes a lot of sense. And what it will do, hopefully, because you can get intermodal now all the way across the country, it will add a lot of economies of scale. You know, when you think about transportation, the two rules are you want to go have as much on the train or truck as you can and go as far as you can. It's not just economies of scale and weight, it's also economies of distance. So if we can go very far and take out those drayage links and everything, it'll actually decrease the cost per container as it goes east to west from our busiest export ports to our sort of busiest consumption areas. In terms of, you know, well, will this, you know, mess with prices? It doesn't seem like that to me. There is still competition. And of course, it's not just rail. You could go to OTR and different things. So to me, the benefits of the merger outweigh the potential drawbacks.
From our viewpoint at the Port of Los Angeles, it now gives us access to the most populous third of the country. And in addition to that, it'll take out some of these handoffs that we witnessed at Global 4 in north of Chicago or West Cleveland. It'll combine talent, make that seamless move across country even better. For the East Coast ports, it gives them a way out west as well. Now, I talked to my friend Peter Friedman of the Agricultural Transportation Coalition last week. And of course, folks are telling him it could lead to uneven service, differentiating prices, et cetera. All that has to be taken care of. There's going to be a necessary regulatory approval process, and without a customer, none of this works. So these companies, as they combine their efforts, are going to have to get out, travel the country, and make sure they're meeting the requirements of importers, exporters, and domestic clients alike. But I like this opportunity, and there may even need to be a response from competition of this projected merger. So a lot of upside for us here at the port, but much work to do on the company's behalf to get this done.
Another question here for the both of you. This one on the de minimis. President Trump has suspended the $800 de minimis exemption effective August 28th. What kind of impact do you think that will have on consumers and the supply chain? Zach?
I hope no one on the call is making a lot of their income out of Etsy, because that might go away. So, the thing about the de minimis is, if you look at shipments coming in using de minimis, it has spiked in the last 10 years. We have hundreds, millions of these shipments coming in. Some of that's Temu and Shine. But also, it's not only a way to avoid tariffs, it's a way to speed things up. And so that, I think, will be the interesting challenge is now all of these, these shipments are coming in. And if they don't have the de minimis exception, they will have to now go through a longer sort of customs process. So in addition to the cost, it's going to slow some things down on time. I do think it makes sense, if pulling back somewhat on de minimis, if you look at the Temu and Shine, a lot of, the way they were able to operate may have been with sort of questionable labor. And I say this as a parent of a 13-year-old, okay? So I'm very familiar with the Shine ecosystem. But pulling that back probably makes a little bit of sense. It's good now that they've given more time. When they just sort of chopped off de minimis earlier this year, obviously it led to a big traffic jam. I would expect that most large companies are going to find ways around this and be okay. Where really I'm concerned is with the people who de minimis was sort of meant to protect in the first place. Small businesses doing these tiny shipments, trying to get off the ground. Those folks will hurt. There will be probably some slowdowns because now I have to check everything. But for large companies, I don't think it's a huge issue.
Yeah, in the end, higher prices, probably fewer orders. For our great customs agents on the ground here in Los Angeles, a lot more work to do. And for the Commerce Department, who oversees the program generally, they're going to have to put more great resources against this. But it's going to change the landscape. There are millions of these small packages that come in through the ports every day. And I think it may lead a little bit to a relook again at the overnight delivery service here domestically, which is really turned into next week delivery service for customers like me. So there's a lot to sort out here, but probably those prices go up, the orders are fewer, and you're going to have a lot of people on the ground trying to assess the duties and taxes for these products, taking a lot of our resources away from the traditional day-to-day business. Much more to understand. Thank you.
Gene, another question we have for you here, another one that I'm condensing because it came in from a few reporters, Bill Mongaluzzo of Journal of Commerce, Vanessa Yurkovich from CNN, and a few others. Will the latest 90-day pause on tariffs on imports from China motivate retailers to ramp up their purchase orders with factories in China? Do you expect another rush of cargo in the coming months?
Short answer is I don't expect a big rush, but the cargo is not going to fall off a cliff in general, as indicated by the August numbers, and then how we go through the balance of the year. We're also, please remember, going to go up against pretty high comparables from last year as those numbers started to escalate on the container import side of the business. It may allow for a couple more purchases where folks were unsure of where those China tariffs were going to be, but realistically speaking, no real big impact. What it does tell me, with yet another extension on the negotiations between the world's two largest economies, there's more in store for all of us on how this trading relationship is going to evolve. We're going to stay tuned on this one. Thank you all.
Gene, another question here. This comes from Harry Chang of Taiwan Public Television Service. Harry asks, could we see a decline in cargo volume after those new tariffs that took effect last week?
Yes, Harry, thanks for joining. And I do see a decline in cargo volume. Again, the comps last year were pretty elevated. We've brought in a lot of inventory, as Zach and I have covered here this morning. And realistically speaking, even going back to the earliest part of the year when we said we'd probably see a 10% decline in overall cargo coming through the Port of Los Angeles, we're going to track with that right now. The one variable that I've gotten wrong every time in this request is the changing goalpost on trade policy. When hard policy came in, cargo really fell off a cliff. When that policy was eased and deadlines extended, that's when the cargo is picked up. So with everything I know right now, yeah, we'll have lower cargo volume in the back half of the year because we brought so much in. Last year was pretty elevated, and I think we're in decent shape across the board. I'll be watching the sales inventory sales ratio that's broadcast out by the St. Louis Fed on a regular basis as well, just to keep in line with all of these really important economic indicators that we're witnessing. The other piece to this, too, is the last 3 months' jobs reports that have been in the news so frequently. Again, an imperfect science based on a survey methodology that looks a lot different than it did 10 and 20 years ago. Still, as we've stated earlier this year, companies have kind of hit the pause button on hiring, major capital investments, and most of their energy, from the big OEMs to the companies that are located right here in Los Angeles that were at our Chamber of Commerce meeting yesterday morning that Maria Salinas held. The bottom line is we just don't know what's going to stick or what's going to change. For right now, the safe bet is less cargo, but nothing overly dramatic that would put any of us in peril. Thanks, Harry. Appreciate you joining.
Thanks so much, Gene. Another question here that is for the both of you. So we'll start with Zach and then we'll go to Gene. This question is from Kennedy Hayes of Fox News. Kennedy asks, with cost differences expected to be passed on to mainstream consumers this October, what is your advice for American shoppers and consumers? For example, were parents right to try to do back-to-school shopping a little bit early this year?
Well, sure. I mean, we did at my house, actually. And so you do things as early as you can. You do see, Kennedy, and thanks for the question, there's information from P&G saying people are buying smaller packages. In some ways, maybe the higher costs are forcing families to act more like businesses do, where you're more just in time. And that allows you to hold back on some costs. I would say that it's probably a good idea, especially if there's a large purchase, something like automotive, electronics, doing that earlier rather than later. We ask our respondents every month, hey, where do you see everything going in the next 12 months? And it's interesting. The inventory level number comes in at 56, which means we're bringing inventories in, but not at a really elevated rate, which I think is consistent with what Gene just said. But if we look at our three cost metrics, for inventory, 75, warehousing, 75, transportation, 74, you add those together, that's about 224 points, right? Well, anytime we've been above 210, that's started to be inflationary. Transportation and warehousing costs always lead overall consumer costs. The last time we were around 225 points, which is what our respondents are predicting, was sort of the back half of 2022. Now, it's not the 240, 250 we saw in the beginning of 22 when inflation was really out of control, but those are inflationary numbers. And what it tells me, Kennedy, is that firms are expecting, hey, we are going to import, maybe a little less than we were, but the costs associated with those imports are going to be higher, at least for the next 12 months, and those will show up, I think, in a lot of different consumer products.
Yeah, Kennedy, that's right. And I also hear from retailers that they're not going to be loading up on inventory for another real important reason, and that's that they don't want to have huge markdowns on excess product after the all-important holiday season. So you got the sourcing manager, the merchandiser really planning out, hey, what's high velocity off our shelves and online buying platforms? What can I still get at a decent fee so I'm not cutting into my margin too much? Managing my transportation budget. And thirdly, let's make sure that we're buying what's going to be sold. Unsure yet how the American consumer's willingness to buy as prices increase are going to cross over that line of demarcation. I think the other thing here, too, is every family I talk with, whether it's the dock workers or up at the Elks Club here in San Pedro, it's all about watching the family budget. We're hearing stuff in the news every single day. We're worried about inflation. Others are saying there's not going to be inflation. Well, running a family home, you got to be careful. So let's watch the family budget. Let's prioritize our expenses. It's back to school season now. Kids are checking in at colleges. They're going back to high school, new clothes, backpacks, etc. As Zach has said, everybody's watching their wallet right now. Thanks for joining, Kennedy.
Got two more quick questions here. Gene, this one is from Greg Miller of Lloyd's List. Greg asks, are any of the importers that you're speaking to holding out hope for the Supreme Court to ultimately rule that the IEEPA tariffs are illegal?
Now, I think everybody in our industry, and I'll geek out for a second, are watching this really closely. And I don't think it's people rooting for or against anything. It's about that level of certainty that Zach has underscored in many of his comments here this morning. Let's try to figure out what's happening. If you leave any issue just to litigation, nobody wins. So let's keep moving this thing forward as best we can. I was just in Washington Sunday and Monday of this week. And the folks I talked to, especially at the Commerce Department, asked me, what do you want to see? How do you want to do things? I said, just tell me the ground rules so I can get to work. We've got a lot of investment that we're planning here at the port through Dina Arian-Zalen and her Development Bureau. We've got a lot of customers that are asking us to expand our service capabilities. And let's get ready. These are long-term investments, not transactional products that we're looking at here at the port. So once we understand the rules, let's get to work.
Thanks, Gene.
Thanks, Greg.
Last question here from Stuart Turles of Freight Waves. Stuart asks, what are you hearing and seeing from ocean carriers regarding shifting of China-connected vessels amid the USTR port fees?
Thanks for joining, Stuart. And it's just about like everybody else in the supply chain. We know these costs are rising, and everybody is trying to mitigate or help downplay the impact of these costs. On the Section 301 of the Trade Act issue for port fees on China-built vessels, many shipping lines are telling me they're trying to make sure they have other national-built vessels coming into the ports as opposed to the China-built ones. And if, in fact, they get these port fees assessed to their ships, they're going to pass them on to the importer and exporter of record. That simply just adds cost to this overall layer. Trying to find workarounds, trying to find mitigation processes, but in the end, that gets passed on as well. The importer passes that cost on where they can too. Thanks, Stuart.
Gene, that's it for the media questions today. I will turn it back over to you to close out.
Thanks, Chelsea. So great to have you with us, Zach. And I suspect you gained some new followers of the LMI after this discussion, which I think is just awesome. Appreciate all your good work and especially your time today. Thanks, Zach.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun to do this. I didn't know I was supposed to wear a tie, so next time I will bring that. I apologize.
Be yourself as always, and I'll report to your dad that you did a tremendous job today.
Thank you.
Finally, I'd like to share an update on the important project that we have here at the Port of Los Angeles. Our proposal to raise the height of the iconic Vincent Thomas Bridge, a vital artery in our port complex. Completed back in 1963, this mile-long bridge connects San Pedro to Terminal Island and is managed by the California Department of Transportation, or Caltrans, as we know them out here. Caltrans is moving forward with plans to resurface the bridge's aging deck. This project, costing about $800 million, is scheduled to start early next year and will require rerouting of traffic as the bridge is closed for 18 to 24 months. It's important to note that the existing redecking plan could either reduce or just maintain the bridge's current 185-foot vertical clearance. This limitation restricts access for larger vessels to the 3 container terminals north of the bridge. However, if we can raise the bridge to a height of 211 feet during the redecking project, all 7 of our container terminals would be able to accommodate the world's largest and cleanest container ships. Right now, ships carrying over 15,000 container units can't reach these terminals, which account for 40% of our port's capacity. Raising the bridge would enable us to service 23,000 TEU megaships across all of our marine terminals. That translates into a new level of competitiveness, even more jobs, and additional economic opportunities for our region and beyond. Environmentally, this would mean welcoming bigger, cleaner, and fewer ships to Los Angeles, resulting in reduced emissions and improved efficiency. And larger ships will provide better economies of scale, which could mean lower costs for importers and exporters. We're now in discussion with state leaders who must approve any plan to raise the bridge. Our proposal only extends the project's timeline by 12 months. We've already secured private funding, and some of the best engineering firms in the world are already on board. We'll also continue to actively seek additional federal support. The Vincent Thomas Bridge is a state asset, and its future affects the entire national supply chain. This signature project presents a unique opportunity to future-proof the Port of Los Angeles. With that, we can solve two problems: making sure the bridge is redecked for safety and opening all terminals to the biggest, cleanest ships in the world. That's why I'm working with our stakeholders to conduct a comprehensive and urgent evaluation of raising the Vincent Thomas Bridge. This will go a long way to ensuring the health and prosperity of our community for generations to come. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you all back here again in September.